Go ahead and we'll just work our way through here, answer the questions, and we'll easily get these notes done here today. Number 25, should already have that. Did everyone get oxygen? Okay, number 26, there's 3 stages that are going to be part of the Calvin cycle. Each one is pretty descriptive in terms of what it does. Okay, 3 stages at the bottom of this slide. It says the 3 stages of C3 photosynthesis, which means it's a 3-carbon compound. It's the most common photosynthesis that's done on the planet. There's 2 other ones, but we'll look at C3. The first stage is you have carbon fixation. And with carbon fixation or carbon dioxide fixation, it means that carbon dioxide is put into this reaction set. And the whole reaction set is called the Calvin cycle. The second one is you have a carbon dioxide reduction. What does that mean? Picks up electrons, right? So you have to use electrons, which comes from, does anyone remember what the electron carrier was that the light reactions produce? Starts with an N, NADPH, right? So that's what provides the electrons. Okay, NADPH is oxidized, meaning it loses its electrons, and it gives it up to carbon dioxide, or at least the carbon atoms, that will be reduced. And then RUBP regeneration, this happens within that cycle, and we put that down yesterday, at least in your packet, where we went through all the different stages. Make sure you take a look at that again, but RUBP is regenerated from G3P. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that's going on, but these are your 3 main stages that make it up. Okay, second thing that we need to get done here. Let's see, it says during carbon dioxide fixation, what is the name of the enzyme that attaches carbon dioxide to the 5-carbon RUBP molecule? That is, let's see if it has it on this slide. Guess not. This is the slide that has it. Rubisco is what it's called. Note the way that it is written. It is written that way for a reason. It stands for ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase. Just remember it as Rubisco. So you have to have Rubisco in order to put carbon dioxide into that cycle. How do you know it's an enzyme? Just by hearing the name.
ACE.
ACE, got it. Okay, so just know what that enzyme's name is. Number 28, we already answered this, so what is the answer to number 28? Gains electrons. Yep, it's the gain of electrons. Number 29, what energy molecules are used to reduce carbon dioxide? Okay, one is going to be NADPH, which we've already seen before. And there's another energy molecule that's being used in this cycle, if you look at it. ATP. Okay, so anytime reactions take place, reactions always involve electrons. Okay, so there's going to be oxidation of one, reduction of the other one. Number 30, during the regeneration, I think there's a typo in there. Just scratch out on number 30 where it says during the regeneration of ATP. Get rid of that all. I just want to know, how are the 5 G3Ps used? So G3P is going to be something that's kicked out of this cycle. And I want to make sure that we know what those are. There's the 5 things right there. So for G3P, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, 5 of them move back into the cycle. They're rearranged, and it regenerates RUBP. But for this one, in terms of the G3P that is kicked out, know that it can be used to regenerate ribulose. Okay, so 5 of them do go on to regenerate ribulose. And then one of them within the cycle is either going to be used to make sugars and complex carbs. It's going to be used to make fats. It's going to be maybe possibly used directly as energy, or it can be used to make proteins if nitrogen is added to it. Where do plants get their nitrogen from? Soil. Where does it come from in terms of how they get in the soil? Decompose stuff. Where else? Fertilizers. Where else? How does it get from the atmosphere to the soil naturally? Nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So all that stuff that you learned way back when comes back, right? Everything's going to connect in here. Now for number 32, we're going to switch, and this will actually wrap out the chapter. This isn't the only type of photosynthesis that exists. This works really well in moderate climates where you have moderate temperatures and ample water. So think about what it's like around here in the really depths of summer when it's really hot. There's not a lot of rainfall. What happened to people's lawns that don't water them?
They're like brown.
Yeah, they just turn brown. Even when you water them, they still turn brown. Grass uses the C3 photosynthesis. So you got to have some adaptations because we know that some plants thrive in those kind of conditions. Kentucky bluegrass isn't one of them. So we're going to look at this thing called C4 photosynthesis, which is a 4-carbon compound. If we really quickly just go back to the cycle and look at where the name C3 comes from, once carbon dioxide is put in to this cycle, each one of these, if that represents a carbon atom, is 3. That's why they call it C3 photosynthesis. C4 photosynthesis, what it does is carbon is going to be temporarily stored in a 4-carbon molecule. And then later on, it's going to be put into the Calvin cycle. So there's actually another step that's involved in this one. 32. How does C4 photosynthesis protect against water loss? Stomata, and I don't really have the full answer on here, but the stomata close during the hot parts of the day. The stomata close during the hot parts of the day. Okay, that's one of the key things that it does. Yeah, question. Number 30. Did you get those written down? Okay. List the 5 substances a plant can make with G3P. Yeah, they're the same one, aren't they? Yep, so either 30 or 31, wherever you wrote that. You don't need to write it twice. Good question. Okay, so 30 or 31, whichever one you pick, you're good enough on that one. Okay, so these, the stomata only close during the hotter parts of the day. They're open the rest of the time. You'd find the same thing with C3. When they get dry enough, those stoma close so that water isn't lost from the plant. What is the loss of water from the plant called? Starts with a T. Transpiration. Close enough. Transpiration. All right, so there's a lot of transpiration when it's hot, when it's windy, those kind of things. So the stoma have to be open and close. These things are adapted to close when it gets hot. So since some of these plants are going to be found in tropical areas, that's what you're going to see going on. Number 33, what's the name of the 4-carbon molecule that stores carbon dioxide? It's hidden within this slide. Here's the answer right here. It's called oxaloacetate. Okay, so there's a side set of reactions. There's another little cycle that goes on in a different location that's really close to where photosynthesis takes place. And this carbon dioxide is just temporarily stored in this substance called oxaloacetate. I know you've had a lot of names thrown at you, but there's just a few little ones that, like this one right here, you just want to be aware of, and that's the key thing here. Okay, so just know that you have oxaloacetate is going to store carbon dioxide, which is a 4-carbon molecule, where the name C4 photosynthesis comes from. Number 34, photorespiration. The reason that C4 plants do a really good job is they don't have to worry about this thing called photorespiration that C3 plants have to worry about. So essentially, here's what happens with photorespiration. Again, this is just a flow chart that kind of shows what can take place with photorespiration. If you look carefully at what's going on, you have the enzyme rubisco right here. So we're still talking about the Calvin cycle. This would be a C3 plant. Notice what it can take up. It can take carbon dioxide, which puts it into this first 3-carbon compound, which you need in order for the Calvin cycle to move forward. Or what else can it take up? It can take up oxygen. Where does the oxygen come from? So where, like in photosynthesis, would oxygen be generated? Water is split. Which set of reactions does that happen in? Light reactions. Okay, so it does happen light reactions. If you didn't know that, don't worry about it, but start looking at some of these major products that come out. Now what ends up happening is this oxygen gets put into the cycle. It's not supposed to, because you can't make sugar from the oxygen. You need the carbon. Right? Carbon is what it's after. But what ends up happening is it goes ahead and incorporates it in, makes a slightly different substance right here. And then later on, this can be put back into the cycle when carbon dioxide becomes present again. But what do you suppose happens to the rate of photosynthesis if rubisco mistakenly grabs oxygen and puts it into this whole cycle? Yeah, it slows down, or maybe even comes to a screeching halt, which means plants can't make the food that they need. So what C4 plants do is they have a solution to this problem. So the C3 plant, this is shown in the diagram right here, takes in carbon dioxide through the stomata, and then it enters into one of the chloroplasts, where it's going to go through the Calvin cycle in the stroma, and it's going to crank out G3P. Okay, and that's what typical plants look like. A majority of the world's plants use that particular process. The ones that are found in more arid climates or tropical climates, you guys recognize this plant? Corn. When does it grow really good in Nebraska? When it's really hot and when it's really humid. So tropical-like conditions, which exist for at least a month or two during the parts of the summer. What it does instead, the stoma open and close. They open during the cooler parts of the day and they close when it gets really hot. But what you'll notice, at least from here, the carbon dioxide enters. It goes into a cell called the mesophyll cell, okay, first, and it's stored temporarily. Okay, it's stored as a 4-carbon compound, which is where it gets its name C4. Then what does it do? Then it goes into CO2. Now what this does is, since it's stored temporarily, and since the carbon is picked up from this cell, oxygen is going to be elsewhere. Right? It's not going to be stored as this 4-carbon material. So what ends up happening is you get a pretty clean movement from getting the carbon from one location and picking it up, putting it into the Calvin cycle. Whereas if the stoma closed, it'd be kind of like, let's say we put you into a room that's completely sealed. What happens to the carbon dioxide over time? It's going to start to increase and the oxygen is going to decrease. Anyone know what level, what percentage level carbon dioxide is lethal? There's normally it's really small, it's like 0.04% in the atmosphere at any given time. 5% carbon dioxide is enough to kill you, right? So at that point in time, it becomes toxic. So think about that with plants. If they have their stoma closed and the oxygen levels are going up, they can't photosynthesize because of photorespiration. What this does is it kind of ensures that your carbon, or to a point, it's probably not perfect, but the carbon does get into the Calvin cycle. Okay, a couple of things that we can answer now. So number 34, photorespiration is when oxygen is put into the Calvin cycle instead of carbon dioxide. And there's a good chemical reason for that. I'm going to pull up an internet page here quick. All right, we're going to look at CO2. So if we pull up an image of CO2, okay, this is the molecule CO2. How would you describe that structure? Double bonds, and then just the way that it's set up is very straight. It's linear, is what we would say. Okay, so that's what carbon dioxide looks like. Now let's look up the oxygen that you're breathing, which is O2. And I got to put molecule. I found this out this morning. Otherwise, we just get a logo for O2. Okay, here's a good one. What do you notice about its structure? Yeah, it's also straight. All right, why does Rubisco mess this up? It's basically the same thing. You got to remember there's no eyes or ears on Rubisco. It's going all by shape and feel, if you want to think of it that way. And so these look, just in terms of the feel and the shape, a lot alike. Okay, so those are the things that you kind of got to look at when you're trying to figure out why this stuff happens.
So like C3 plants and C4 plants can both mess up and get oxygen?
Yeah. C4's got, here's a really good picture to kind of visualize what's taking place. So with the C3 plants, okay, they're pulling in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They're releasing oxygen, but if this thing closes, then oxygen begins to build up here in this air-filled space of the leaf. By the way, is this the top or the bottom of the leaf right here? Bottom have the stoma. And what ends up happening, if you get higher levels of oxygen, it makes it more likely to pull in an oxygen instead of a carbon dioxide. Okay, so that's a C3 plant. Now for a C4, during the hot parts of the day, it's also going to close the stomata. But the difference is the oxygen accumulates out here, and then the carbon is picked up from this mesophyll cell, where it's being stored as a 4-carbon compound with the name of oxaloacetate. And then from there, it's going to enter into the cycle. So it's just it's more efficient just in terms of when it gets hot of pulling in carbon dioxide rather than making the mistake of oxygen. But I bet, and I'm not 100% sure on this, that it can still pull in oxygen. It just doesn't pull in near as much, just because it has sort of a system set up. Now, like any other engineering problems, do you suppose that there is a cost to doing something like this? There is. There's always a trade-off. All right, so this is much simpler just in design and how it works. This involves another step. And in order to push these things in and make another chemical compound, that requires energy. So this has an energy cost to it. So plants that don't grow in hot tropical environments will definitely be at a disadvantage to those that I should say, the ones that grow in a hot, dry environment will be at a disadvantage if it's not hot and dry and they're competing against other plants. This doesn't take as much energy, so they can use that energy to grow, to reproduce, and they're going to probably survive better in an environment where the temperatures are moderate. However, if you flip this around and you try to put one of these plants in a hot, dry climate, which one grows better? This one right here, okay, the right-hand side. So there's always trade-offs, and I'll show you a picture that'll really hopefully drive that point home. Number 35, didn't answer that yet. What layer of the leaf does C3 photosynthesis take place in? It's actually this one right here. It's the mesophyll, so just the mesophyll cell. Meso means middle, so in the middle of the leaf you have some different cells. Okay, they all take place in the mesophyll, where it's the palisade layer or the spongy layer. Okay, and then if we look at where does C4 take place, let's just focus on the Calvin cycle. It's the bundle sheath cell. Now, what on earth is the bundle sheath? We should probably look that picture up real fast. So, leaf anatomy. Okay, here they are. All right, so if you look at the leaf now, we looked at a picture the other day. You have a special set of cells that surround the veins. So, of course, this is where the water's at, and this is where the products of photosynthesis will eventually be put. This is where the photosynthesis, or the Calvin cycle, actually takes place. So carbon dioxide would be stored in this layer, and then the carbon is actually transported into here. So as the oxygen diffuses out, it ends up more in this, into that spongy layer. Sorry, clicked on the site. All right, ends up, the diacids end up in here, whereas if you have the carbon dioxide stored in here, it's much more likely to put on carbon than it is to oxygen. If we look at it, and we should just really look at this quick too, a C3 plant, you'll notice that those bundle sheath cells do not exist around the vein. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, C4 seems to have, let's just look at a leaf. I'm showing bundle sheath. Maybe there's bundle sheath. I don't think there was. Bundle sheath there. All right, bad example. Okay, C4, C3. So it looks like there is a bundle sheath. What's the difference between the two here? Yeah, one's much thicker on the outside. So you got these mesophyll cells that are kind of arranged around. All right, so it looks like we just need to let's clarify this now so that we got it right. So you got a single layer bundle sheath around the veins on this one, a single layer bundle sheath around this one, C3 versus C4. This one has more mesophyll cells right here. So the cells that surround the bundle sheath. Okay, so those are what's storing the carbon dioxide temporarily. This, where's the carbon dioxide going to be stored? You know, maybe a few in, these cells here. Most of it's going to be stored in the air spaces. Over here, it's stored in these cells. Is that okay? That makes sense? Okay, so they both have bundle sheath. I had that messed up earlier. All right, let's finish this thing out. Number 36, Cam. Okay, as far as CAM photosynthesis goes, CAM is going to occur in plants that grow in hot, arid climates, rather than sort of the hot tropical where there's some rain, maybe some dry prairies. We're talking about more arid climates. Now, in terms of what the CAM refers to, here's what it stands for: crassulation acid metabolism. So more big terms. To put this into perspective, if we go look up crassulation. Let's pull up some pictures of plants that are in crassulaceae. All right, here's one here. Anyone have these at home? I know I've seen these around here. What do you notice about the leaves on every single one of these? They're extremely thick. So in other words, they have a thick, waxy covering on them. These things are adapted to live in dry climates. So you can throw the cactus into this group as well. Being they grow in dry climates, it means it's going to get probably extremely hot. Making sure that you don't run out of water would be a top priority if you're engineering a plant like this. And so that's kind of what you're going to be looking at with the crassulaceae. That's why it has that weird name to it. It also stores it as a 4-carbon compound. But the biggest difference between them, when does the carbon storage take place? It's at night. These things pull in carbon dioxide at night, but not during the day, because if you've ever been to the desert before, a few of you guys been out southwest United States, traveled across the Colorado Plateau, like Utah, Nevada, those places in the summer. What do you notice about the temperatures? At least if you're not up in the upper elevations. The wind is high, so that's a thing that's a problem for plants. And if you've ever go to the desert, it heats up during the day. It heats up fast, so the temperature swings are big. It heats up fast, it cools down quick. And so these things don't want to be caught and dry out, and what they end up doing is they only pull this in at night. Now that presents a problem from an engineering standpoint. Carbon is going to be pulled in, and of course, what's that carbon used for? Fats, proteins, carbohydrates, basically build cells and keep this plant alive. If it's only pulling in that stuff that it needs at nighttime, how fast are these things going to grow? Really slow. Anyone have cactus at home? Bonsai tree. All right, these things just grow slow. Right, these type of plants are just not going to grow extremely fast because they can only pull in their carbon that they need at night. This is a great example right here. Everyone knows what one of these is. It's pineapple. How long does it take for that pineapple to grow to that point?
Quite a while.
What do you think? It's quite a while.
6 months.
Okay, reasonable estimates. That's what I would have guessed. We looked it up as 2 years for the pineapple plant to grow. Okay, so that just gives you an idea. It grows slow, and there's a reason for it. As long as you know the reason, it makes it a lot more interesting. I did not believe it. We went to a couple of websites, and we verified it. It takes a couple years for them to grow.
They actually do grow on the ground, too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This, and I don't know if you guys knew this either. We found this out. This, of course, we know it's a fruit, but each one of these little things, these little parts, are flowers. All right, so they form these little bracts on them, is what they're called. And that ends up becoming the flower portion, of course, which would be pollinated. But it does take a while for these plants to grow. So obviously, growing them here in Nebraska is not going to work because we just simply don't have a growing season that's continuous like you do in other locations, which is why you don't find them growing here. Okay, so, and that's typically why we don't see a lot of cactus growing here either. I've seen prickly pear out in some of the pastures and yucca plants, which would be probably cam. But for the most part, you just don't find a lot of them that are well adapted to the conditions we have. Number 37. Now, what's the advantages of C3, C4, and cam? Okay, so C3, where do they grow the best? That's kind of maybe the way to answer that question. What's that? Right. Let's go mild climates. I don't know if we want to put plentiful moisture, but let's put adequate moisture. So mild climates, adequate moisture. Where does C4 grow the best?
Hot.
Yep, hot, tropical. Okay, so typically they're hot and they're in the tropics. All right, that could mean maybe some excess rainfall. It could mean dry seasons, but they tend to grow in hotter climates. What about cam? Yeah, let's just put deserts if everyone's okay with that. Hot and dry would be maybe a desert. What's the disadvantage of a C3? Can't grow in hot climates. Okay, so that's one's its biggest drawback. Grows good until it gets hot. What about C4?
Needs too much energy.
Grows slow, right? So it uses energy. There's a cost that's involved. So it isn't going to compete well in this region, which is why we don't see as many. How about the cam? They grow really slow, which means that they're not going to be able to outcompete other plants. They're going to get beat for shade, for example. They'll get shaded out by some of the other plants if they're growing in the wrong environment. But they have a huge advantage in the correct environment. Okay, so I just put this up. It's kind of fun to take a look at the difference between these two. Which one of those would win in a race? The more important question is what kind of race are we talking about here?
Yeah. If it's a long distance race.
Yeah, it's a long distance race. Prius is probably going to win out just because it's based on mileage. right? So, you know, if we just do some rough calculations, let's figure that out.
I think mine is. Yeah, mine does.
2.8 seconds to get to 60.
That's. I guarantee you. Do you think that's foot to the floor? Because my car foot to the floor gets up.
All right, 23.8. So let's say that they're actually on the race. So this is kind of like the tortoise and the hare story that goes on. All right, I need to figure out how to use my calculator on the iPad.
I don't like it.
I'm not gonna get caught.
23.8
I do it sometime to get it cleaned out, get all the oil. It's kind of
times 18. All right, so according to these, if these numbers are right, this can go 428.4 miles on a tank of gas under ideal conditions, which we know rarely exist. Okay, Toyota Prius, 48 miles at an 11.9 gallon tank, can go 571 miles before it needs to fuel. All right, so that thing is going to be able to go well over 100 miles further. However, you know, 0 to 60, it's obviously not even a competition between the two. All right, there's a 15-second lag just off the Prius.
6 seconds just to get up to 20 miles per hour.
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's, when you're trying to look at how things work, just take an engineering standpoint on it. There's cost to absolutely everything. Like, what's the cost of having, I mean, humans, and primates in general, we got real flexible shoulders. You know, you can take your shoulder and go 180. What's the problem? What's the trade-off? It's real easy to hurt. It's very easy to dislocate.
Wrestling team knows that.
Yeah. So always look at